Hetero historians have got their knickers in a twist over my latest book, Jack the Ripper and Abraham Lincoln, published by Troubador and now available on Amazon. In the book, I argue the case that the 19th century Irish-American celebrity doctor Francis Tumblety was one of the worst serial killers of all time. In 1865, he was arrested as a suspected conspirator in the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. 25 years later, Scotland Yard picked him up off the streets of London and charged him with being Jack the Ripper. So how have I got the hetero historians riled? Well, the main thing I've done is to point out that Francis Tumblety was a gay man. He was homosexual. Now, this is not a side issue. It is absolutely central to understanding how he became implicated in these two crimes. Now, at this point, don't start lecturing me about the word homosexual not existing before the 1880s. People knew perfectly well centuries ago what same-sex relations were all about. Ripperologists in the present day have tended to shy away from the sexuality of Francis Tumblety, but police, detectives and journalists at the time did not. In 1888, when Francis Tumblety was arrested at the height of the Ripper killings in Whitechapel, it was actually over gross indecency with 4 different men, and that is evidenced in the police records. When Scotland Yard swapped notes with their American counterparts, his long record for gross indecency emerged. Let's be clear, most of his recurring legal problems related to cruising on the streets, picking up young men, then employing them in his medical business as valets, as he called them. They then would rob from him. He would then go to the courts or the police to complain. And when the young man was apprehended, that young man would then claim that they had been assaulted sexually by Tumblety. There are several recorded incidents of this happening, and Tumblety gets into the same mess time and time again. It is all footnoted, all the research is there cited in the book. So how could a gay man be Jack the Ripper? The hetero historians counter. Let's be absolutely clear. Tumblety was first and foremost a psychopath, regardless of his sexuality. He was implicated in 2 manslaughters of his own patients, an illegal abortion, violent assaults, and gross indecency. Quite an impressive criminal record. Now, I'm a gay man, but I'm not a psychopath, unlike Tumblety. And the point is that he was implicated in both killing and injuring people during his life. Why he attacked women in Whitechapel in 1888 is of course a matter of conjecture. After all, the crime was never solved. Anything said about the Ripper case is theoretical, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be considered. So what I'd ask the hetero historians to do is just calm down and bear with me while I argue the case for Francis Tumblety being Jack the Ripper. In 1888, homosexuality, which had only just begun to be defined, was regarded very much as a mental disorder. The fact that Tumblety was homosexual was held against him as proof that he was morally degenerate, and we see that in correspondence between police and journalists. Now, while of course that thesis is completely untrue, it is true that Tumblety was violently misogynistic, and it's evidenced time and again. Furthermore, he claimed to have been married to a woman who then turned out to be a prostitute, and after that he forswore women forever after. Now, of course, implied in that is a horrific generalisation that all women are basically prostitutes. This was part of Tumblety's misogynistic outlook. According to 2 witnesses who are cited in the book with footnotes, Tumblety also had a collection of uteruses in glass jars, which he used to produce at his all-male dinner parties. Now, of course, this was one of the reasons why Scotland Yard, when they found out about this, thought, he's our man. Annie Chapman, for example, and Mary Kelly, two of the canonical victims of Jack the Ripper, were brutally eviscerated. Annie Chapman's uterus was declared to be missing in the pathology report. So you can see why Scotland Yard began to look at Tumblety as a very credible suspect. Having looked in detail at his life story, I do discuss, theoretically, what might have motivated him to carry out the Whitechapel killings. For example, it's very clear, and I explain why in the book, that he was syphilitic and that he was going into a kind of mental decline at this stage. He was also enormously frustrated as a so-called doctor. He had no medical qualifications, but he used to hit out at mainstream physicians all the time with their emphasis on surgery as opposed to his herbal cure approach. Now, what I think we may have seen in Whitechapel is a kind of ritualistic surgery performed on these women by a man who was not taken seriously for decades as a real doctor. And we know from his autobiography that this really got to him. Going back to the Lincoln assassination in 1865, over which he was charged and briefly imprisoned, we see Tumblety claiming to have had intimate relations with President Lincoln. Now, I know that this makes the hetero historians boil with rage, as they claim that intimate relations was just the flowery language of the time. Sure, that is true in many instances, but when you examine the life of Francis Tumblety, intimate relations can very well mean a whole lot more. As for Abraham Lincoln, I detour in the book to look at his sexuality, given the fact that he appears to have known Tumblety, and I explain how in the book. Lincoln's sexuality has been the subject of discussion since the time he was alive. He shared a bed with numerous men, not just when he was young and poverty-stricken, but even when he was president. I have no evidence to suggest that Tumblety had a fling with President Lincoln, but I wouldn't be the first to suggest it. Also, there is a story told by Tumblety and other sources that he exchanged gifts with the US Secretary of State William Seward, receiving an Arab horse from Seward in exchange for a greyhound. He refers to Seward as Billy in the book. Now, I also cover some interesting correspondence between the US Secretary of State and a high-ranking politician. I quoted in the book, it is ridiculously homosexual, and I defy any hetero historian to try and suggest otherwise. To me, Tumblety was the classic example of an evil queen, and there is growing interest within the LGBT community in our rotten apples, our bad eggs. We don't need to believe that every gay man who ever existed was a noble and heroic figure, because we know it's not true from our own experience. Francis Tumblety was undoubtedly one of the most odious men to have ever walked the planet. His sexuality, in my view, is an incredibly interesting factor, and I think it also explains why he escaped conviction time and time again. So, my dear hetero historians, lap it up. We have every right to tell our story, and we're not going to be subjected to gay erasure. If you haven't done so already, get a copy of Jack the Ripper and Abraham Lincoln, and I'd really appreciate your reviews on Amazon, Goodreads and other sites. I've already been interviewed a couple of times by the BBC and by a host of podcasts and blogs. If you want to interview me, just get in touch. Thank you for sparing some time. Sorry to you hetero historians, I'm not going to give you an inch, so to speak. And finally, I just want to plug the Beers with Queers podcast, who did a great interview with me, and there's a link to that interview in the description box below. But for now, thanks and goodbye.